And so, so welcome. So, Debbie, could you also place in the chat the meeting schedule for today? That would be
Sure.
awesome. So Debbie Trent has kindly been assisting as needed with management of this citizen diplomacy research group. So she is assisting currently. If you could, each of you, I would much appreciate if you would place a bio about you. Jacob and Mohsen accepted because I'll be presenting them, but when they're ready to speak. But for the rest of you, it would be great if you could post a one-paragraph bio about yourself in the chat, or introduce yourself in some fashion so that each of you knows who is who. Much appreciated. We're going to proceed to our first speaker, which is Jacob Schuenberg. And apologies, Jacob, if I mispronounce your last name. Is that
almost perfect?
Correct?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. And so Jacob, just to give you a little bit of information about him, he is the Secretary General of the International Sport and Culture Association. He will be talking about grassroots sports diplomacy today. He, as the Secretary General for the last 12 plus years, has been responsible for more than 20 major international ISCA grassroots sports and health projects, and he's presently driving the development of the global campaign for physical activity called Now We Move, which he'll tell us a bit more about in his presentation. Jacob previously worked for Denmark's Ministry of Culture, and he has a master's in political science from, I'm probably going to butcher this, but Aarhus University.
Well done.
That's my best guess. All right, Jacob, go ahead. And you should have, you should be able to, here's Mohsen, you should be able to present your slides on your own.
Great, so I'll try to do that. Let me just see if I can make that happen, just a second.
Great.
How does that work?
Yep, that works.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. As you said, in my organization, ISCA, we've developed a concept called grassroots sports diplomacy, and I hope to be able to give you some information and inspiration about that at today's meeting. And then really looking forward to the dialogue. This is not the beginning or the end of the world, but it's a concept that may have some relevance to what you are discussing in your group as well. So I would start by saying a little bit about my organization, International Sport and Culture Association. And we are a global umbrella for grassroots sport, physical activity, and sport for all. So our ambition is to make more people physically active. And we are, if you will, a business-to-business organization. So we do that by helping our partners and our member organizations all over the world to do a little bit better, to learn from each other, to learn from other sectors, to be able to implement sport and physical activity programs. So this is all about citizens' engagement in sport and physical activity, and nothing to do with professional or elite sports. As I said, we are a umbrella organization, a member-based one with more than 260 member organizations all over the world. We've been developing international projects through external funds. The EU and foundations and private companies have been supporting us in that work. This is just to illustrate that things have been happening all over the place. Many of the ones on this call might be from the US, maybe some others from other continents as well. And while we have a starting point, I'm sitting in Denmark, and we have a starting point in many activities in Europe. We really want to have that global outlook. And we do three different levels of things. One thing is advocacy. So we try to speak the voice of grassroots sport and physical activity to international organizations, the WHO, UNESCO, European Union, and others. And we help our members on a national level to advocate for more physical activity. Of course, that relates very much to the SDGs. And while some are more interested in those than others, that's, I think, for us an important agenda to be part of. The second pillar of our work is the capacity building, the solutions, as we call it, for our members. So we want them to learn, as I said, from each other, from our projects, and grassroots sport diplomacy is one of them, so that they can do a little bit of a better job. And finally, we also have online learning components, especially in a time of Corona. It's helpful to be able to reach out and enable learning when we are not able to meet physically. So we do put a lot of effort into our online learning platform these days. And the final pillar, and Paul mentioned it, is the Now We Move campaign. Really, this is to give opportunities to local organizations to stage physical activity events. And just to give you an example, we've done something called the Move Week since 2012, where we enable local organizations to stage activities through this particular week. These days, this is taking up a lot of speed, and the biggest implementation is now happening in Latin America, in fact. But let's move on with the grassroots sport diplomacy topic. This is a little bit of a schematic to show you some of the concepts that we've been dealing with. This was 10 different organizations coming together to develop this concept of grassroots sport diplomacy. And as you can see, we're taking and lending from some different related concepts, both in terms of public and non-governmental diplomacy. We're looking at the intersection between what we call hard and soft diplomacy, or people to people, or even you could call it citizens diplomacy. And then many of you will probably relate to the concept called sport diplomacy too, but it has had a little bit of an, in my opinion, unlucky connotation so far. So we can all talk about the ping pong diplomacy. That was the US and China building relationships through ping pong, or we can talk about major sporting events on the professional level. But we would rather talk about how citizens' engagement on a grassroots level are relevant for diplomatic relationships, and how citizens can actually drive through physical activities and other local level engagement, how they can drive better relationships between countries. And this is what we call grassroots sport diplomacy. Few pictures to show you that the development of these concepts were happening in a group of researchers and doers, a lot of sport organizations and different types of universities coming together to understand how we could define and develop and test this new concept. And I would like to say that we've taken a starting point all the time, really at the grassroots level, to understand how local organizations could be relevant for this agenda. Here there are a few definitions. I can say with a smile on my face, they are long, maybe too long, but some of the key features here is that we combine that global and international aspect with the local one, so trying to help local level actors to be relevant on an international scale. And we would also want to emphasize the civil society component here. So that specifically means that we believe there's a value in civic engagement, organizations outside of the governmental or for-profit sphere that are actually trying to make a difference, and trying to do that also in the international level. This is key components of grassroots sport diplomacy. So we've developed some principles, I would even say aspects of grassroots sport diplomacy, and these are the transfer of sharing of successful practices. This is where organizations come together to learn from each other. We've also seen that happening when non-governmental organizations do that totally independently from the public sector, from governments or ministries of foreign affairs. We've seen also international campaigns for physical activity to be a relevant tool to promote some of these grassroots values as well. And we've seen that different sectors can come together in grassroots sport diplomacy. In other words, this is not specifically or only about sport, it's also about health, education and social inclusion and other sectors. And this is an important aspect for us. And of course, we explored also how new technologies can be part of shaping the future of diplomacy and grassroots sports diplomacy specifically. These are just a few slides with some more details on that. I'll be happy to share this presentation with you after. But just to say, we try to give some cases, some examples of what this grassroots sports diplomacy could look like. These dimensions that I've just mentioned, they have all been developed through some actual empirical evidence, not as a theoretical construct. So we're happy that we actually can see a relevant application of these concepts also in real life. And we also have looked at other initiatives around the world. Here's just a few. Street Football World, some of you may know it, is a global umbrella for grassroots football, in fact, for trying to say that we can probably use the game of football, the most popular one probably on the planet, for more than just a competition or winning or major events, but rather to say that this is also a way of building relationships, peace and resilience in local communities. Some of you might have heard about the football club, the soccer club called Barcelona. They are also doing quite a lot of work in terms of outreach and enabling local clubs and local children really to connect across borders. And this final example is from Italy, what they call Mondiali Antirasisti. So this is an anti-racism campaign and camp where they bring all kinds of people, typically football fans or even hooligans, together in a very local, relaxed atmosphere where they play against each other, all kinds of games with no referees. And these guys, and most of them are guys, frankly, they are the ones also screaming, kicking, and sometimes hitting on each other when there are football games. So they try to bring them together in a different context to enable a more, let's say, peaceful coexistence, and it's working out quite well. There's some more pictures of that. So we've developed at the end of the project, it ended quite recently, some recommendations. These are very top line and friendly, but not necessarily very specific recommendations, but at least some suggestions as to how we may develop grassroots sport diplomacy actions in the future, targeting both governments, non-governmental organizations, and individuals themselves. So we've tried to give some guidance to how to take this concept forward. We've developed an online learning course about grassroots sport diplomacy on the learning platform that I mentioned before. You're welcome to go and check it. It's all free. And we're really here to not say we've found the solution, but I think we've taken a starting point to understanding how physical activity on a local level can also be part of citizen-to-citizen diplomacy or international relations that may not have to do with governmental, let's say, agendas or political goals on a higher level, but rather to say this is about building better communities and better relationships internationally. And we think we can be a part of that. And we've been happy to use the grassroots sport diplomacy concept to take a few first steps in that direction. And I look forward to hearing your feedback on these ideas today. Thank you.
Great, Jacob. Thank you for your presentation. So we're going to move directly, just to keep everyone to remind everybody, we're going to move directly to the second presentation, then follow up with discussion. So the second presentation is by Mohsen Amin, and let me tell you a little bit about Mohsen. Mohsen is a PhD student in cultural sociology at Alame Tabatabai University, and I'm sorry, Mohsen, for my terrible pronunciation, I'm sure, in Tehran, Iran. He was as an undergraduate student, he studied cultural and Islamic studies. He completed his master's degree in culture and communication with a focus on policy studies. His master's thesis, if I have it right, was an anthropological study of the Arba'in ceremony in Iraq, which he will be talking about today as part of a discussion around religious diplomacy. And Mohsen has researched the culture and identity of Shia Islam and is currently writing his doctoral dissertation on the subject of clergy and nationality in contemporary Iran. So Mohsen, Go right ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself so that we can hear you. We still can't hear you as yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. I also welcome all the audience and thank PDC for giving me the opportunity to tell the story of the complexities of citizen diplomacy in the Middle East. Dear attendants, I want to make you a short presentation about Arba'in Shia ritual as religious diplomacy. What I will present first, I will talk about Shia Islam to familiarize you with the background of the discussion. Then I will explain main problem, and after that I will present original data according to the implications of Arba'in in the framework of religious diplomacy. Finally, I will mention the achievements of citizen diplomacy in this ceremony. All right. First of all, I should explain an essential introduction about Shia Islam. Maybe you know, maybe not, but there are two main denomination in Islam, Sunni and Shia. And the Shia is the second largest branch of Islam. And the main problem between Sunnis and Shias is the prophet successor. Shias said that the worthy successor is Imam, and Sunni says Caliphate. And also, there are some different branches of Shia Islam, such as Alawis, who lived in Syria and Turkey, and Zaydis, who lived in Yemen, and Ismailis, who live all over the world. The next point, the importance of identity among Shias. Shias are Shia is a minority in Islam, so being on the margins and being in the minority made them to concentrate on their identity. For example, Shias are less likely to form a government because they are a minority. That is why they have tried to preserve their identity through rituals and symbols. The one of these rituals we will speak about at this presentation. Who is Hussein? Where is Karbala? And what is Arba'in, or how is Arba'in? I explained the Shia, and now I want to say about Arba'in. Arba'in is a ceremony that is held annually 40 days after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, which has been respected in various periods by Shia. This pilgrimage has been revived again in Iraq since Saddam's ousted. In this ceremony, Shias and some other Islamic minorities and even non-Islamic religions travel long distance from cities inside and outside Iraq to Karbala. Karbala is a city in south of Iraq. One of the busiest routes in this pilgrimage, which is usually done on foot, is a 90-kilometer route from Najaf to Karbala. And I participate in this route, and I study this ceremony in this route. According to Shias, Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, was martyred in the early days of Islam by a group of oppressors along with his family. So, so in Arbaeen ceremony nowadays, in terms of number of participants and distance travel is privileged and prominent. Anyway, the three main features of this ritual can be described as follows. First one, transnational and some extent trans-religion. I will show you some photos that will be clear for you that it is transnational and trans-religious. Second is non-governmental and participatory. I mean, governments do not have the main role in the responsibility in carrying out the ceremony. The main activities of the pilgrimage, including receptions, rest places, etc., are provided by the people themselves, pilgrims or hosts, especially the Iraqi Shias as hosts. And the third, it has utopic phase and contains the meaning of Armageddon, end time. And I will explain three signs of these claims. First is most of the expenses of this pilgrimage in Iraq are free. For example, free places to rest, free food and food, free drinks, even sometimes free domestic transportation. Second, all the pilgrims will interview, talk about the hope of the promised Savior returning. And the third, the presence of millions of people in this huge human community from all over the world is another sign of the being an apocalyptic pilgrim. You can see the photos here. Some flags from various countries, and the people from other religions. It's Islamic and Shia ceremony, but we can observe Christian and others, such as Sunnis and others. Okay, now I want to explain the structure of my research. First of all, I have to clarify the problematic aspect of this research. So I must mention that public policies of undemocratic governments undermine civil society and as a result reduce the possibility of citizen diplomacy. For this reason, the citizens of such governments should look for opportunities to come to the arena and interact with others in a real way, both inside and outside the borders. So the main problem is, the main question is, what are the implications of religious diplomacy in the area? And I applied active and participatory observation and some informal interviews in this study. Now, I will mention the data that I obtained. The data showed, first one, the cooperation of participants from different nationalities, generations, maybe you saw the photos, genders and cultures. I can turn back to the photo and you can see gender cultures, religious, and nationalities. Second one, the different ethnicities and religions, Sunnis and Christians, are present in this ceremony. It's for Shia, but we can observe other participants from other religions and ethnicities. Third one, I observed more than 5 languages, such as Arabic, Persian, Turkish, English, and Urdu, that are present in this ceremony. The next one, the variety family, friendly, and group contribution to the event. For example, we can observe the groups of friends, the family, and the other type of groups or communities that that's gathering in Arbain in Iraq. The last one is the interpretations of those who attend the ceremony are peaceful and friendly. But of course, they pay attention to the apocalyptic discourse and the coming of Savior. This photo also shows the population. And finally, I will summarize the results in a few statements based on the achievements of this research. So I can say this pilgrimage, Arbain, provides opportunities to first reproduction of Imam Hussein's human values such as dignity, honor, and honesty. Maybe it's mutual for all saints. Second one, liberation from the checklist of the domination of the religious state, because this rite or ritual takes place somewhere outside the borders in Iraq, and it's the suitable opportunity for Iranian Shia to participate in the out of their national borders. Third, overcoming barriers to balanced communication and feeling classless, especially for groups that are unfortunately considered weak and low in public culture. We can observe the classless in this ceremony. And next one is the pilgrimage provides opportunities for minority and marginalized groups to gather, declare their existence, and perform their certain rituals. Maybe the rituals that they can't perform in their country. And the last one is the facilitation intercultural dialogue and learning the values of tolerance. I mean, the participants, the pilgrims in this pilgrimage can talk to each other, can talk about the cultures, about their beliefs, and so it is a suitable opportunity for them to practice. Try to highlight the capacity of this ceremony to fulfill the conditions of religious diplomacy in the Middle East. I hope this presentation has been helpful to you and has raised questions in your mind. Thank you.
Great, Mohsen. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. So um, I am going to just make sure that we can get back to the screen. You can go ahead and close your presentation. So I'm going to open up the conversation now. So we have basically the conversation is open to anybody who who has questions for for Jacob and Mohsen. But you can also make comments, so feel free, and feel free also to use the chat to convey any questions or points. Who would like to go first?
I saw in the chat, Paul, that Debbie wanted to raise a question. So if she's still on the call, maybe you want to go first.
Yep. Debbie?
Thank you. So yesterday I happened to be listening in on a webinar that was conducted by the Kettering Foundation and the Council of Philanthropy, I think it was. And one of the speakers was, and it was around how academics and researchers and others can influence and also learn from foundations and their giving patterns, their funding patterns. Since one of the common themes in and among the foundations and the audience's work is, democracy building and deliberative democracy. Francis Fukuyama was one of the speakers, and he spoke about how democracy is a really revelatory process for sort of administering diverse societies, done right, of course. So I was wondering, Jakob, as you were presenting, how the work that your organization is doing does or doesn't promote that kind of democracy building.
Thank you. That's a super interesting question. I might be speaking on behalf of myself mostly, and maybe my organization is certainly not these 10 different organizations behind the project, because we didn't discuss this topic directly, but we did come to a very clear conclusion that our type of diplomacy, grassroots sport diplomacy, is not value free. It is value based, and some of the values that we see in this concept are based on individual rights, human rights, and I will also say the right to organize in civil society, as I mentioned. So I think it's, as a consequence of that, also a natural thing to discuss how indeed deliberation, conversation, and at the end, ultimately also democracy can be relevant drivers for engagement across borders. So I think that we might have a contribution to make, because we take a starting point in the value of local societies, individual citizens, and their rights to express themselves, which I think are closely related to deliberative democracy. But this is probably my opinion, because we have had difficult discussions about what are the values, what are the definitions, both of democracy, but also of engagement and individual human rights and their indivisibility. So it's a tricky one, I would say, but I would say that grassroots sport diplomacy has a relevance and probably also a value affiliation to deliberative democracy. Thank you.
Jacob, following up on that, I guess I have maybe two questions here. One is, I wonder to what extent are built into ISCA activities, but sports diplomacy more generally is a structured dialogue pre or and/or post these sports or athletic engagements, because it's one thing just to come together and play together. It's another thing to reflect on that and the implications of that. The second question I had is about whether or not there are examples of, and I imagine ISCA has some examples, but to what extent there are examples of sports diplomacy, whether at the elite level or at the grassroots level, that actually form teams across lines of difference, as opposed to having teams with different from different nationalities or different religious groups or other kind of lines of difference, kind of competing with each other, right? Because that kind of competition can actually accentuate difference rather than and aggravate those differences rather than trying to overcome them.
Yeah, very good questions. Interesting and challenging as they are. I will start by saying that in ISKE, we don't believe that sport is good in its own. It's not by definition good to do sport, whether on grassroots or elite level. It can in fact be done in a very harmful way. And this is why we need to appreciate that the dialogue between citizens across borders, also using grassroots sport, is not by definition good. It is actually the interaction, the conversation and the dialogues happening as part of the activities and, as you say, prior and after. So we try to build up systems to allow citizens exchanges, and where sport is really a medium or a way to get together and get to know each other, but the learning and the value lies in the human relationships that are being built in that conversation. So yes, we try to make more than just the sport activity across borders. In fact, I would say that maybe the other aspects are more important. Sport is really a means only in this case. So definitely the dialogue part is essential. And then you point to the question of what if we mix teams? Because some of the, I would say, negative values that are potentially there in sport would be the competitive aspects. Nothing wrong with competition. A healthy competition to win is always a good thing in my mind. But if it gets to be detrimental to the dialogue and the understanding, then we have an issue. So one way, it's a simple way to, overcome those barriers is, of course, to mix teams of people from different nationalities, different backgrounds, different cultures. That makes complete sense. But it's really just one of the ways to make this work. We don't look at sport as, football or American football or volleyball or whatever. It's not individual sports that's interesting. We would rather look at this as physical activity, play, and trying to combine different ways of being physically active and learning from different cultures, because different countries have different physical activity cultures too. So when our name is the International Sport and Culture Association, it's really because we believe in the culture of movement, not in the sport specific items. So maybe indeed we should put and mix teams from different backgrounds to make them understand each other better, but probably we should also look at playing in a different way together, so we don't get bound by these rules and it's always about winning, right? It's more a question about really having a good time understanding ourselves and understanding the other one. Thank you.
And so just to follow quickly, there are examples within ISCA or elsewhere where, because I actually don't know much about this, of in fact teams that are constructed across lines of difference.
Absolutely. Fundamentally, we don't do many exchanges where teams are coming as a team to compete in another country in a specific tournament. We would rather make exchanges where both young and adult groups are coming across borders and get to know each other and do funny things together. Maybe they do a little bit of physical activity. Maybe they do some culture, some other exchange aspects too. So it's really about getting to know each other and getting to learn from a different culture as well. And that happens definitely best when you don't try to stay in one colored jersey on the one side, a different color on the other side. That's not what we're about at all. We'd rather see people mixing and understanding each other, having openness for that dialogue. It happens on the pitch also if you mix teams, but it certainly happens off the pitch as well, before and after those exchanges. And we have examples. I'll be happy to sending over some examples of that so that you can get some more insights into this, because I know that typically we would think about sports across borders as being competitions, right? And that exists, peace with that, but that's not what we are about really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Other questions and comments? And for those of you who have your you're not live. You have photos instead of you. If you happen to be available, it'd be great to see you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I have just a comment rather than a question. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for the speakers. It was really interesting. And it reminded me of an experience that I had working with an NGO, not in God's name, whose origin was in Wien, but actually it has even some institution here in Berlin. So I worked in Berlin. Whose aim was to promote kickboxing as a cultural and diplomatic tool to foster integration between people with migrants background and here German people. And it was really interesting to work with them as a researcher. We were providing some workshops. And at the very beginning of the delegating the task, I wanted to measure and sort of weigh the social impact of this institution. But then at the end, I just made some qualitative interviews, some research. But it was even really interesting to see how actually sport can be related even to religion, because at the very end, we were just speaking how to integrate actually what is Islamism. That it was even interesting to see from the speakers, the people that I interviewed, to see how actually they could not even realize if it was a religion or a culture themselves. So it was even going around this topic and study it and what people think and what is the public opinion about that. And yeah, that was really interesting. And actually, even my first concern, as Paul said, was like, but it's not maybe such sports like kickboxing. I'm even a kickboxer, maybe just make the rivalry and the incomprehension bigger between people. But actually, it was, as even Jacob said, about discipline and values. They learn a discipline to respect each other, especially the enemies, so to say, and they started to get to know them. So it was really, really beautiful to see at the end the result. Yeah, and at the end, even we saw a project, we just bumped into a project called One House, which is a project that is not still implemented in Berlin, and it's about a church that, or better a house, as the name says, that has 3 religions altogether, the main for Jews, Muslim people, and Christian. We're still working on it, but maybe in Berlin that will be available in the next few years. That would be really nice to see. That was all I wanted to share.
Rosella, would you share a link to the program that you were referring to here, or that would be
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
And by all means, guys, I want to encourage all of you, because we will be sharing out the chat to the wider list. The wider list of email list has close to 400 people in it across the world. And people do, if they can't attend our meetings, do check that. So by all means, share other projects that you see that you think you want to bring our attention to, projects or programs in citizen diplomacy. Other questions for Mohsen or Jacob?
Maybe, Paul, I can come in again because I think what Rosella was mentioning was interesting. There's an intersection here between an activity, a religious foundation, perhaps some values, and I'm curious maybe to ask Mohsen, how do you see that? Because in your presentation you mentioned some religious background. You also mentioned how that can be a backdrop to creating tolerance and understanding. And so, how is it possible to use your starting point to also say that we are exploring and exchanging on different values, not only religious ones, but other values as well? How do you see that?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the question was for Mohsen. Go ahead, Mohsen.
I think I mentioned that Arbain is a religious ceremony, religious pilgrim, but we can concentrate on a human aspect and peaceful aspects of this ceremony, this pilgrim, that will make this ceremony general and all people all over the world can participate in this. I showed some photos from Christians, Sunnis, and other religions, ethnicity, and nationalities. It's my idea that I think to diplomacy, especially citizen diplomacy and public diplomacy, in practice. I mean, when we speak, we can't do any diplomacy. We can't make any citizen or nation relationships. So we should find some opportunities like Arbaeen to practice diplomacy, especially citizen diplomacy. And I try to explain that it's a new opportunity for Muslims and others in Middle East with the special situation that maybe you know about Middle East.
Following up on that, Mohsen, I had some questions for you. One is about whether so you noted that Arbaeen is not under, and I forget the exact terms you used, but it's not under the thumb of some sort of, or it's not controlled by some official religion or government. But that makes me wonder whether or not anybody is managing the event to make it happen. So is there some sort of a nonprofit organization, some sort of cross-religious association that every year manages the event to make sure that it proceeds successfully?
Yes, it's non-governmental at first. Iranian and Iraqis are participating in this pilgrims together, and from other nationalities, Indians and maybe some Pakistanis, and also I observed some places, especially for red, that were for European Muslims, and they were the sponsor of these places, maybe food and others. I want to mention that who performed the Arbaeen. I will say the Muslims and or people. There is a traditional organization. They tell mawkib means a small room with some people, for example, a cooker, and they will message pilgrims for because they are walking more than 90 kilometers. Okay, and I think there is a traditional organization, traditional small organization. If you know about Arabic culture, maybe a tribe, such a tribe, or but smaller than a tribe, tribes together perform this ceremony. The ceremony that maybe I forgot to mention, that gather more than 10 million people all over the world, from Europe, North America, and especially Middle East.
Great, Mohsen. Debbie, you had a question. I'm sorry, missed your.
It got answered. Thank you.
Okay, great. Others would love to hear from you if you have questions. Barbara, Elizabeth, Goldnar, James, Danielle, or Dandan. I can't remember if I got your name right. Frank, etc. Questions? Barbara.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I just wanted to say I found both of your presentations fascinating. And it's just kind of interesting that you're coming at this from, you know, kind of different perspectives and different angles, but to a certain extent, you're achieving a similar goal. So
Yeah,
thank you both. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, I think, you know, part of the function, just to underscore your point, part of the function of the CDRG is to bring together people who are practicing citizen diplomacy in very different ways, and so upcoming meetings will hopefully shine a light on still other forms of citizen diplomacy happening in the world. I just actually I'll reveal. Just privately messaged James Ketterer, who was on this call, who's at I think currently in Egypt, but is American and does jazz diplomacy, and I'm trying to get him to talk about jazz diplomacy at an upcoming meeting. There's an efflorescence of forms of citizen diplomacy happening, so it's great to have a forum through which we can hear about these. Go ahead, Barbara, you're going to say?
No, we're speaking of jazz diplomacy, so the PDC monthly launches, I think it was last year, maybe it was during COVID, I completely lost track of time. We had one on jazz diplomacy and Voice of America, which was just fascinating. So it's a great topic. So that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to remind you guys, for those who might not know, PDC is our parent organization of the CDRG. The CDRG is Citizen Diplomacy Research Group. The Public Diplomacy Council is a US-based nonprofit that promotes public diplomacy. Elizabeth, you had, yes.
Yeah. Yes, I wanted to thank both Jacob and Mohsen and you for this today. And as I was listening, I kept thinking of all the people I wish were in on, you know, hearing all of this. And I just finished teaching another course for UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. And it was on public and cultural diplomacy. And what I'm wondering is, are those students, they're literally all over the world in many fields, but all interested in diplomacy and especially in citizen diplomacy. Are they welcome to join?
Oh, absolutely. This is an open network, so anybody can join these meetings. Anybody can join the email list, and if you have people who are interested, they should just contact me or Debbie. I don't know if Debbie, you want to put your email in the list so that they can be added to.
Liz, please go ahead and email. Great.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Because there are a lot of them, and they're just all enthusiastic, and you know, everything we're talking about today, you know, sport diplomacy, jazz diplomacy, religious diplomacy, you know, all of this is part of everyone else's interest. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Other comments, thoughts? Noel, Enrique. Enrique, I don't know where you're coming from. It would be great to hear from you.
Hi. Yeah, I'm coming from Brazil. Actually, this is my first meeting. I couldn't make it last time. I was contacted by one of the interns, so I was very happy to be contacted from. It was a great exposition to both of you. Since it was my first time, I was actually more listening than preparing to pose a question. But I just wanted to thank you both. It's been great to be introduced to new ways of practicing citizen diplomacy and just in general. So my first contact was with NGOs and peace education. So it's been great to see religious and sports come into that and how we can work on these topics together. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. Others?
I just want to make a comment as well.
Hi, sorry.
Go ahead, Carla.
And Dandan, you're contacting us. You're speaking to us from where in China?
Not right now. I'm in Urbana, in Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Right. So I'm just 1 hour behind you. But I'm from China, and I have some connections in China about the sports management, about the international education. Yeah. Anyway. Sorry, Gala, you go ahead.
No problem. It's always like this on Zoom. I just wanted to say hello to everyone. This is my first meeting. I'm in the field of inclusive and international education, and I wanted to thank the presenters. It was very interesting. I don't have any questions, but I'm glad to be part of the group.
And Golnar, where are you coming from?
I'm originally from Iran, but I live in Washington, D.C. and have lived in the U.S. for the last 35 years.
Oh, great! And you're in Washington D.C. and what was I going to ask you? So and how did you get connected to the group?
You sent me an email, Paul.
Okay.
I don't know how you found me.
Yeah, I have interns in my LinkedIn profile madly sending out messages, including Noel here is on the call. Thank you, Noel. So that's part of the reason why we get as many people connected as we do, thanks to our interns. So
I'm not sure if there's a connection through the University of Maryland, perhaps as well, because I just saw something you sent out on the international education listserv.
Yeah, no, yes, although that was probably something different. But in any case, great. So other comments or questions? Yes,
sure.
James.
I'll just jump in. I just want to say also, this is my first meeting of this group. Paul, you reached out to me, I think, through a mutual contact, and I'm very happy to be connected to everyone. And Paul mentioned that I might be willing to talk about jazz diplomacy. I'm more than willing to talk about it. I'll talk about it to anybody at any time. So the harder thing is to get me to stop talking about it. So look forward to doing that. Yeah, somebody had mentioned that the PDC had done something on it. And last year there was actually an exhibit in the entry hall at Maine State. And there was a movie that the BBC and PBS jointly did that came out about maybe 2 years ago. So I'll draw on all of that and happy to talk about it, but mostly just more immediately happy to meet everyone and be part of this this group, and look forward to more. So thanks.
Great. Haley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Haley, for those of you who don't know me. I just wanted to thank the presenters for their wonderful presentations, and just comment as well that it was really refreshing to hear these presentations, specifically relating to sports and to faith and religion, because I really do see that it really connects to the heart of citizen diplomacy and building bridges and finding common ground, because I really think that in order to kind of continue in a positive mindset in this globalization and this world that we find ourselves now, it's really important to find those connecting factors that do override different cultures and languages to find that common ground. And I think that kind of given a lot of the polarization that we see in the United States where I'm from and other areas, it's just really important to find things like faith and sports that really supersede language and other barriers. So just thank you for your presentations.
Great. Questions or discussion?
May I pose a question myself, Paul? Because I think it's really interesting what Haley mentioned here. I think what we can see with grassroots sport for sure is that it's really a vehicle to engage in a dialogue. And I had the question from Debbie on deliberative democracy. So obviously we are on a mission here to enable that open, explorative dialogue between different cultures and nations. I still think that we need to come closer to defining and understanding our own values before we can exchange with others too. And I think it's not as if all values are equal or are the same. We need to appreciate where we're coming from to be able to have a meaningful dialogue with others. So I'm always curious to hear where people are. Are there some religious backgrounds which are value-based clearly? Are there some general fundamental beliefs in individual human rights, for instance, or democracy, as it was mentioned? Can we define and discuss some of the values? We will also have a better dialogue with the ones that might not be looking quite like ourselves. So it's just an input here, maybe an open question for reflection, that defining your own values is a helpful starting point for a good and open dialogue. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Jacob, is that an open question you want us to take, or is it just simply you're throwing out that out there as something important to consider in the future?
That is up to the group, obviously. I'm just mentioning this because it was a fundamental discussion in our group, in fact. Are there fundamental values behind what we're trying to do here? Are we completely neutral, or are there inherent values that we fundamentally believe in? And there were indeed. So I think this group is also maybe well helped by considering individually or as a group if there are values that we are thinking are relevant to take as a starting point or a base, or at least as a starting point for a conversation with others that may not share the same values.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If I can just bounce back off of that, that's something that I'm very passionate about. And with my current work and working with international exchanges, that's something that we make sure that we implement throughout the programs. So the main program I work on is with Tech Girls. So we work with high school girls across the MENA region, Central Asia, and the United States. And they're high schoolers, so they're quite young. But in order to kind of find that initial common ground, one of the first activities we do in the United States when they all come to the US. Most of them haven't even traveled outside of their countries before or flown on a plane. So it's a really dynamic but somewhat nerve-wracking experience for them. So the activity we do is called Universal Values, where we actually literally bring out a whiteboard and we have them kind of, shout out values that they think that transcend different cultures, everything from honesty, love, integrity, community, just different things, and they can see how they immediately connect with someone from Kyrgyzstan, even though they're from Morocco. And then we kind of dig a little bit deeper. What does that look like in your country? Because community looks very different in, Lebanon than in the United States. So I think that, personally, I believe that there are universal values. I think that they express themselves differently depending on maybe where you're from or who you are. But that's another way to kind of build that community and just start that conversation as a foundation when you're bringing people from different countries together.
Could I jump in too?
Of course.
I think also I agree with everything that's just been said and so wonderfully put by Haley. But I also think that if you're looking at kind of specific vehicles for public diplomacy, let's say sports, to go back to Jacob's one. So, as an American, I'm a fan of a sport that it's not uniquely American, but is American as in baseball, but is actually global and is increasingly global, both in the players who play in the United States and where it's played around the world. The World Baseball Classic is an example of this. And I bring that up because I think on this question of values, I think what can be important, effective, and really compelling in the presentation, whether it's through sports or, I'm being told my internet connection is unstable. I hope you can hear me.
No, we can hear you.
Okay. Maybe I'm just unstable. Anyway, that using these kind of vehicles also allows us to show how we, and in this case, the United States, but in any place that's presenting a diplomatic tool, isn't coming at it with a sense that values are static and that they're kind of, sui generis, they're just fully blown and they're all this, and here's where we are, and isn't that great? So in baseball, for instance, this is a sport, the professional sport that systematically discriminated on a basis of race for much of its life, that only in the last 2 months has named its first general manager, who is a woman, that has been exclusionary in many different ways. And it's a mirror of a society that has also had to struggle with identifying its own values and having them evolve, sometimes 2 steps forward and 1 step back, sometimes 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. But I think that struggle, showing you know, what one of my mentors once said, you know, you've really got to show the good, the bad, and the ugly for it to be valuable. And I think we could use something like sports to do that in a way that everybody could kind of have some sense of a common understanding about it, yet even if they don't have a common understanding about the sense of values anyway.
So I'm going to pose a challenge here, because I think so I often find in these conversations that, first of all, the people who come to it, generally speaking, share certain values. So there's a certain self-selection process that we all share, certain, you know, openness to difference, and learning about about that difference. And to me, one of the most interesting kind of phenomena to think about is how context affects our behavior and our attitudes, and depending on the context, we may actually change our attitudes or behavior. So the challenge, I guess, that I want to pose to both Jacob and Mohsen as our presenters is, I wonder, as I've pointed out repeatedly, and I think everybody is well aware, all of these efforts to create kind of tolerance and collaboration across lines of difference are really vulnerable and fragile, and they take a lot of effort to bring together. And oftentimes they're evanescent. In other words, they come and go. And so that's the case with a sports event. That's the case with a religious pilgrimage. They're events that bring us together in a particular context of tolerance, but then people can go back to their context, to their everyday context, and actually be moved by, for instance, a religious zealot in Florida who burns the Quran, and then decide they want to burn, you know, in return, they want to burn the flag of some country, like the United States or something like that. So I guess to me the challenge and the question is whether or not these momentary efforts at citizen diplomacy in sports, in religion, in music, et cetera, and so forth, actually have lasting impacts on people's everyday lives, and their attitudes. I don't think there's a clear answer to this. It's probably an open question, and it's also difficult to measure. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a difficult thing for all of us, I suppose. Any thoughts on that?
It's a good one. Mohsen, do you want to go first, or should I try to take a stab at this one?
I just want to add one example. I recently learned about this NBA. No, NBA. That's about basketball. Actually, there are some philanthropists in China, like Joseph Tsai, who is a co-founder with Alibaba. He is very into sports, and he's seeing sports as a very key element in connecting people from different cultures. He actually hosted a basketball game in New York City to bring the Chinese basketball players and the American basketball players together in one big sports event. That was like several years ago. And then this year, we saw lots of international, lots of change in the international affairs. And that, I don't know, I feel like it's hard for the I don't know how to actually describe it, but I mean, I certainly believe the inclusivity of the sports games and this this influence of the individual games led by the individuals, other individuals, you know, to really change their mindsets for everyone who are involved in this game. But at the higher level, in terms of the larger picture, things could be really uncertain. As Paul mentioned, things may come and go, and some influence of the sports games may not be very, you know, lasting over the long term. Yeah.
Jacob, you were going to say something, and then perhaps Mohsen?
Yes, thank you. It's a good question you raised before, Paul. If context influences our behaviors and the international exchanges, diplomatic exchanges, only is a small part of our total existence, then maybe we have a hard time making a difference, right? With smaller events, sport events, religious events. I would think that, well, we know from behavioral science that what really matters is the intensity and the exposure. So if you have a very intense experience, for instance, in a diplomatic relationship or in an exchange, that has a stronger influence on you than everyday practice. We also know that if you're exposed to it frequently, then you have a better chance of influence people's behaviors in the long term. And you know, it was a famous economist thing that said that in the long run we're all dead. And I would vote that we should actually try to make more exchanges to enable that stronger influence. Of course, we need to work on the context where people are living on an everyday basis too. But the more exposure and the more intense those exposures are, the better experiences people will get. The more likelihood we can make, the stronger likelihood is that we can make a difference with these things. And I'm always a proponent for trying, even though it can be difficult, and giving it your best shot, right? So it's a very relevant question. We need to appreciate that we can't change the world with one event only, but maybe a series of events, and making sure we provide intense experiences for individuals is one way to think about it. Thank you.
That's interesting. So both intensity and frequency can kind of have lasting impacts on people's behavior outside those extraordinary citizen diplomacy contexts. Mohsen, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I want to add one comment that I think we face some universal concepts such as democracy, citizenship, diplomacy, citizen diplomacy, and etc. But I think we should concentrate on the context and background that we interpret those notions, those concepts. For example, the notion of citizenship is too different in Middle East and north of Europe and Africa. So when we talk about citizenship, we should interpret the citizenship in the concept of our cultures, our history, and then we can go toward the best meaning and the best interpretations of diplomacy. And I think it's so necessary for us all over the world to read the concept with our context, with our culture, to go forward with this universal concepts.
Great, Mohsen. I think we need to bring the conversation to a close so we can move on to kind of announcements and so on. But Mohsen, I think what I hear you as saying, and I think it's a really important point, is that I think through the process, to the extent that citizen diplomacy involves dialogue, right, it opens up conversation about our presumptions. You know, what Jacob pointed out about our values, about the concept, as the term you're using is our concepts, right? And that can have a lasting impact beyond those fleeting contexts of citizen diplomacy, right? To the extent that we're interrogating our own presumptions in interaction with other people. So I think that's a really important point. So I'm glad. Thank you both for your great presentations, your thoughtful comments, and everybody for participating in the discussion. So I want to finish off by allowing you guys time, if you have announcements of things that you would like to mention. So this can be publications, it can be projects, events, calls for collaboration, ideas, etc., and so forth. The floor is open, and you're also welcome to post things to the chat. I will mention briefly, and I will send a link, by the way, to start off that conversation, that I encourage you, for those of you who have not joined, the organization that I run, called Learning Life, has a family diplomacy initiative. We're essentially developing a family form of diplomacy. I will share the link to our Facebook group, which connects a growing number. We're approaching 1,500 members across the world. So it's connecting families across borders. And next year, we're going to be holding a series of dialogues around the question of what it takes to have healthy and safe families worldwide. So I will be sending a link in the chat in a moment. But any other announcements of things that you're up to that you would like to share? I'm thinking of those particularly who haven't spoken yet. Tenil, I think you're coming from somewhere in Europe, and I probably butchered your name. I'm sorry if I did so. I think it's Maritza with MTA Visions. Ben and Chiara, we haven't heard from you, or any of you, if you want to make announcements.
Yeah, I'm coming from Germany, but I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, which is in the Caribbean. Currently doing my master's with Rosella in international relations and cultural diplomacy. But I really loved both the presentations. It was so informative. And having come from a multicultural and a multiracial country, which is in the Caribbean, I was so interested in the overcoming of barriers, utilizing whether it be sports, food, or music diplomacy. So I really liked, even with religion as well too. So I'm just so interested to see like what else I could learn and how much we could do to overcome the barriers and the communication or cultural barriers to be able to have a more interactive and more connected world.
Great. And I'm sorry, what was your, how do you pronounce your first name again?
Tenil.
Tenil, sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Others?
Hi, Paul. I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Maritza. My video is actually part of another work conference right now. But thank you so much for this venue and this platform. I'm really, really excited about it. I actually learned about it a couple of months ago, or maybe 6 months now. You sent the message on LinkedIn, but it may have been one of your interns, so thank you for that. I've been in the citizen diplomacy space for about 10 years. I've always been referred to, and most recently accepted the calling to be a citizen diplomat. A lot of it has just been the work I've been able to do, so through international arbitration, serving as liaison between countries and companies that are resolving economic disputes, but doing that as an American in other countries, and finding myself in those unique positions to just naturally be a citizen diplomat, whether it's I'm exchanging information about the American culture professionally or personally, or just also taking what I've learned in practice and in theory and bringing that back stateside. So about 4 years ago, I launched a consulting firm that works on the intersections between corporate social responsibility and government relations. And because of my international background, having worked in London and Hong Kong, Lithuania, a lot of my work just kind of came from the global aspect. And so the last year, we've just been really working on our diversity and diplomacy initiatives. And when we talk about diversity and diplomacy, we're mostly looking at diversity in the context of theory and in thought. And so what that means which is why this platform is so amazing, because we You guys go into much more into the details of what diplomacy can be like. For example, intersections between sports and religion, which when you look at it from our context, we tend to kind of just limit it through what our State Department will cover. But right now we actually just launched our most recent diplomacy initiative working on youth and diplomacy. And it's really just kind of training them and helping them to change some of their existing laws in country to help reduce the age in which youth can become involved in politics and diplomacy in their countries. And I actually just posted that in the chat box if anyone's interested in that, if they're working in another country, and would be interested in activating the youth. I think it's just a good time. We have almost 4 generations that are alive right now. It's a good time for us to be working across age to help us to further and better diplomacy over time. But thanks so much, Paul, for this platform, and look forward to working with you and the team and everyone else who's a part of this organization and network.
Great, thanks, Maritza. We will be sending out the most recent Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin, which I and Olivia Chavez, who's one of our interns, has created, which will carry basically some news about citizen diplomacy worldwide. Maritza, you may want to send me a 1 to 2 sentence email with contact information for what you would like to promote. We'd be happy to put it in the next Citizen Diplomacy Bulletin. Others in the last minute or so who have something. Golnar, you just mentioned something here. You just posted.
Yeah, I just posted the website for the consulting that I started on inclusive education, and I'm really interested in connecting with folks internationally who are working on issues around neurodiversity and inclusion of children and adolescents with differences, both in terms of neurodiversity and cultural differences. So if people are working on projects, I would love to collaborate more internationally. And so I just put there my website and also my LinkedIn earlier.
Oh, great. Yeah, and if you can likewise send me a 1 to 2 sentence kind of short description, we can also share it in the CD bulletin. I would also mention to you guys, we do have a LinkedIn group and a Facebook group. Both of those are growing. They have somewhat different populations because there are different people on Facebook and LinkedIn. So those are also ways for you to communicate with more people about your citizen diplomacy initiatives between our meetings. Any last words?
I just want to just sort of comment, hopefully not in an offhand way, that I sense at least a dozen research topics coming out of this discussion. So this is what this group is for, to connect with each other.
Yeah, and not just around research, but also collaborations in citizen diplomacy. So hence why it's important for you guys to kind of share what you're doing and offer possibilities for collaboration, specific possibilities for collaboration. So, okay, so we are going to close off this meeting. I mentioned earlier that we have to select new officers, and we want to make this an open process. I did not make the time at this meeting to discuss that. However, I'm going to send out some information following this meeting to the list to gather any input that you guys might have on both the kinds of officers that we should have and the process for electing them. And so would really welcome your thoughts on that. The last thing I'll end with is just a reminder of our next meetings. They are on, I believe, did you put that at the front of the list, Debbie? I think the next meeting is February 3rd. Yes, February 3rd at 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. That's New York, Washington, D.C. time. And then the following meeting is Tuesday, April 6th, again at 9 a.m., 9 to 10:30 Eastern. So thank you all for your participation. I hope to see you at the next meeting in February. And in the meantime, stay safe in these pandemic times, and have happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.